Today on r/PettyRevenge. I let my flatmate Doodoo themselves, which ultimately led to their eviction. This was around 15 years ago. I had a flatmate, let's call her Julie, who was always crying poor and never paid bills on time, etc. She then announces she's headed to Bali for a week. I said, before you go, are you going to give me the money you owe me for her part of our utility bills? She said when she gets back. I'm livid, so off she goes. On the last day she messages me and tells me she's got Bali belly and had diarrhea all day and worried about the flight home. She also informs me she is broke and could I pay for her taxi home, around $100, from the airport, as she's worried about taking public transport back in case her stomach is still upset. I told her I would be working and not home to pay for her taxi. She says fine, she'll ask one of her friends she's on holiday with to give her the money. Then she informs me she didn't take her house keys with her and could I leave them hidden somewhere so she could get into the house when she gets home. I don't reply, but I assume she thinks I will. Anyway, I wasn't really working, so I hid in my bedroom and I could see the front entrance from my bedroom upstairs and peek out the window. I watch her drive up and exit the taxi. She couldn't locate keys, so starts trying all different ways to get in. I had prepared and made sure every access point was locked up. She starts calling my phone, which I ignore. I can hear her swearing and then she's doubled over, and before I know it she's shitting herself. She's in a denim skirt and it's runny. Now, I'll be honest, I was not quite expecting her shitting on our doorstep. I was more thinking she'd freak out and have to sit outside all day till I came home. But this was a far more perfect outcome. I only wish I could have filmed it. She is horrified but changes into something from her luggage and hides her soiled clothes and suitcase in a bush in the front yard and takes off down the street. I take that opportunity to leave the house, and on my way out, whilst gagging, I placed her soiled clothes inside her suitcase. A few hours later I finally call her back, pretending to be on my lunch break, and she's screaming down the phone blaming me for not leaving out her keys and that she's been sitting outside for hours and begging me to come home to let her in. I said sorry, I have to still finish work and have plans this evening, and she'd have to either call a locksmith or wait till I get home. She said I can taxi over my keys to her, which I refuse. She hangs up, and then I treat myself to 2 movies at the cinema and a nice dinner. I get home later that evening and she's broken a window to get in. The next morning I contact the landlord and tell them what she did. As we paid rent individually and they always had issues with her late rent, they said they would look at evicting her as they'd had enough too. She doesn't speak to me at all, and a few weeks later, I'm informed via the landlord she's moving out. We never speak again. I'm pretty sure she tells the story as me being a psycho flatmate, which I'm happy to wear that badge proudly. For our next story. Husband gives epic petty gift after ongoing boomer neighbor issues. I was told this story would be appreciated here. We moved into a rental house in a neighborhood with our 3 kids, and the day after we moved in, our boomer neighbor, let's call him Gene, knocked on our door after my husband left for work. When I answered the door, he skipped all pleasantries and introductions to gruffly inform me that the light switch in my family room closet needed to be turned off immediately, and that it was my duty to ensure that it was kept off. Obviously puzzled by this demand, I asked what the switch was for. Gene said that the switch was for an exterior patio light that would shine into his bedroom at night and keep him awake, which was not acceptable. I figured the kids had turned it on while exploring the new house, so I assured him I'd turn it off. Without another word, he turned on his heel and went home. Unfortunately, my rude Gene encounters persisted during the 18 months we lived there. He would wait for my husband to leave, then come and complain and gripe at me about something we had done wrong. Our dogs would loudly sniff at the fence if he was outside. Our sprinkler was spraying too high. Our trash can was too close to his, etc., etc. Our other neighbors adored us and our kids, so I really don't think we were the problem. I finally stopped answering the door, so he started leaving notes and even went as far as to find me on Facebook and send a message there. Just, that. The worst. Husband tried to talk to him and tell him to leave me alone, but he'd deny any wrongdoing. Reasoning with him was pointless, so we made the decision to just ignore him the best we could. We were finally moving to a new place out of town, and my husband went back to do the final walkthrough of the house. When he left for the final time, he called me and to let me know he had a gift for me. The last thing he did before locking the door and leaving that house for good? Turning on the patio light switch in the closet, knowing full well the landlord wouldn't be there for final cleaning for 4 days. Best gift ever. I still laugh when I think about it. Let's dive into our next story. Jackass in a B.M.W. thinks he can park in front of the handicap ramp at our church. I had just arrived at church. A good friend Kyle was in his custom electronic wheelchair and he was furious. You see, someone had parked a new B.M.W. right in front of the ramp that Kyle uses to get in. Well, I went inside and got a wheelchair. I went down the steps and picked him up and carried him to the church's wheelchair. I then, with 3 other guys, we picked up and carried Kyle's chair to the top of the stairs. After I put Kyle in his chair and went to my car, I pulled up so close they could not move their car. I then went into the church and joined the service. About 45 minutes a man enters and looked around, so I got up and asked him if I could help him. He stayed, someone blocked him in. We went outside and I said how inconvenient. I then proceeded to tear this guy a new hole. After me chewing them out for 15 minutes, I said they would have to wait. They were furious and threatening to call 911, claiming that they were being held against their will. Well, I had already called the police on the non-emergency line. When the police finally showed up, I backed up. They were spinning a story when the cop asked why they were parked in front of the ramp. As he chewed them out, I just walked away smiling. They got multiple tickets. Our last story for today. A customer abused our support staff, so I let her know that she wasn't as anonymous as she thought she was. Several years ago, I worked the late shift as an online customer support agent for a women's clothing company. The other CSA and I were constantly mistreated by crappy customers, and our managers did absolutely nothing to support us. The company valued its customers so much that the rules for dealing with them were disgustingly lax. For example, this one guy would call in obviously touching himself, but we weren't allowed to hang up on him because he never actually said he was. We had a 3-strike policy where a customer could say pretty much anything they wanted up to 3 times before they were disconnected and banned. But we also had a 1-day turnover policy where if a customer was cut off for inappropriate behavior, the ban was reset the next day. So someone could come in, tell you that you're a B-word 3 times, get kicked off, and then come and do it again the next day. The entire time I worked there, I never saw a single person get permanently banned. Not even the guy touching himself. I eventually ended up quitting specifically because a customer harassed me to the point of me crying, and my manager's response was that I could have an unpaid 10-minute break now instead of my 15-minute break later. Yeah? One of the worst customers was this woman we'll call Kathy. This woman would enter our CSA chats around midnight drunk, she admitted to this. She would ask questions like, "What jeans do you think go with this top?" While the CSA answered, Kathy would say things like, "Wow, this is taking so long. Imagine working a minimum wage job at midnight. Bet you want to unalive yourself." Warning number 1. The next time, it would get a little worse. "Wow, you're such a loser. Have you ever thought about unaliving yourself? I would if I was you." Warning number 2. The last time each night, it would be something like, "I hope you unalive. You're so sad. You should unalive yourself." At that point, we'd let her know we could no longer help her, and we'd disconnect her. And then she'd pop back and chat within a few days and the whole thing would start over. She always said the same kinds of things. She clearly knew she could say 3 separate terrible things to us. Our managers never helped or stepped in. I once looked this woman up. I wanted to know who she was. To my surprise, I found out that she was a therapist. She had her own practice. I was baffled. What she did was a horrible, cruel, unkind thing. I couldn't believe a therapist would do this. I later quit working at the company. I waited a few weeks. And then I made a phone call to Kathy's practice. I spoke to Kathy. I told her I was seeking therapy. During our intake call, she asked me what kind of issues I was facing. "Well," I said, "I do this really weird, psychotic thing a few nights a week. I get really drunk, and I start a chat with minimum wage customer support agents, and I tell them multiple times that they should unalive themselves. That's so effing crazy, right?" She made a tiny noise. A moment passed. The call disconnected. My friends at the company said that she never messaged them again. Our last story for today. Think I'm homeless because of the way I dressed? Have fun waiting outside. We rented out an Airbnb in neighboring city to spend the weekend there. It was in an apartment complex and the only way you could get in was through a fob key. There were 2 entrances, one from outside that took you into a vestibule and the second was from the vestibule into the lobby of the building. My friend, 26 female, and I, 25 female, went downstairs to smoke. We were wearing hoodies and sweatpants and stayed under the building canopy as it was raining. These 2 older ladies, mid-40s, that lived there were trying to go into the building and were giving us some pretty dirty looks. They were whispering to themselves in French, thinking we couldn't understand, and said something about us being homeless. My friend and I were done smoking and wanted to head inside too. Someone was coming out of the building at this time, so we all tried to go in at the same time. Well, the 2 older ladies went in and tried shoving us back out, thinking we were trespassing, and aggressively closed the door behind them. My friend and I were in utter disbelief. I understand that they probably weren't used to us being around and didn't believe we were staying there, but they could have just been polite and asked if we had a fob. Anyway, we used the fob and got into the vestibule. They seemed to be fumbling around for their keys. They didn't have to use it coming in because they intersected with someone coming out of the building. It seemed like they had forgotten their keys upstairs and I could tell they were panicking. My friend and I used the fob again and got into the building. They looked absolutely baffled, and guess what we did? We got in and closed the door behind us. They were too embarrassed to ask us to let them in and continued to fumble around for their keys. My friend and I wished them a good night in French and went upstairs. And those are all the stories we have for today. See you tomorrow.